Spirit Airlines is currently negotiating a $500 million government bailout. Politicians immediately argue over whether the carrier is too big to fail, or if the free market should just let it collapse. The aviation industry operates under strict oversight. Federal agencies monitor every takeoff, route, and restructuring. Yet, because these agencies work in completely isolated silos, the system as a whole remains incredibly fragile. Airlines build their entire business models on spreadsheets, mapping routes between massive physical infrastructure nodes, places like Las Vegas, Fort Lauderdale, or Dallas. We call these geohash anchors. When you plan a route by looking only at internal projections, you assume the surrounding local grid can support your operation indefinitely. You overlook whether the regional housing or transit systems are quietly failing. Keep in mind, an airport is entirely dependent on thousands of people moving physical objects. If a single ramp worker struggles with housing or transit costs and misses a 4 a.m. shift, the operation fractures. This line graph shows the compounding cost of ground delays, known as irregular operations. Every minute a plane sits idle on the tarmac costs an airline roughly $100. Those individual delays stack up fast. Flight crews legally time out, planes miss their slots, and routes are canceled across the board. When the bleeding gets bad enough, the federal government steps in to write multi-million-dollar checks, acting as the insurer of last resort. These bailouts are the retrospective cost of a coordination failure, the bill for neglecting the workforce that makes the flights possible. Let's consider a different approach. What if the corporations relying on an airport stopped managing their ledgers in complete isolation? Right now, airlines, utilities, and insurers are bleeding defensive capital every day to cover employee turnover, operational delays, and bad debt. This diagram shows what happens when we use fractional syndication. Instead of eating those individual losses, these corporations take a tiny fraction of that wasted capital and merge it into a single, localized coordination pool. By pooling resources locally, we stop relying on federal bailouts after a crisis hits and start directly funding the stability of the system before it breaks. The workers operating the tarmac act as an early warning system, detecting gaps in their own survival needs long before an operation fails. Capital from the central pool routes out in 3 directions. First, microcredits flow directly to the household. This resolves acute issues like medical debt or sudden housing instability for the worker. Securing that individual's baseline ensures they physically make it to their early morning shift. Second, capital routes to the local civic entity. This funds local transit authorities and childcare co-ops, giving the surrounding community the physical capacity to absorb the airport's massive operation. Finally, the circuit completes at the corporate balance sheet. Because the groundwork is stable, the airline avoids expensive operational delays, retains its staff, and prevents mass flight cancellations. By distributing capital across the household, the city, and the corporation simultaneously, the protocol stops the specific local fractures that trigger multi-million-dollar cascades. The math on this is highly specific. Deploying pooled capital to stabilize the local workforce generates massive savings across the board. This chart compares the exact return on investment. For every single dollar deployed to close a local survival gap, the network realizes $36 in systemic savings. A $500 million bailout is little more than a rounding error when you look at the total defensive capital currently bleeding out across the region's airlines and utilities. The algorithmic fiduciary completes the market by mapping the systemic risks that isolated corporate ledgers ignore. The Treasury faces a choice. They can continue socializing the cost of fragmented risk, or they can start building a coordination layer that makes federal bailouts mathematically obsolete. A global network simply cannot hold its weight unless the local foundations upon which it stands are fully secured.